Good morning, everyone, and welcome. This webinar is brought to you by Strategies 2.0, a statewide collaborative funded by the California Office of Child Abuse Prevention. Today's webinar is part of a 6-part series. This is session 5 of Are We There Yet? Conversations to Help Navigate Parenting. The webinar is scheduled from 10 to 11:30 a.m. My name is Carrie Collins, and I am today's facilitator. My role today is to introduce the topic and the presenter, keep track of time, and help our presenter and participants in any way needed. In a moment, I will introduce Michelle to you over the webinar guidelines. So all of you have a little red arrow on your taskbar. If you push that red arrow, it will minimize your taskbar if you don't want that taking up some of your screen. You've joined us today either by telephone or by your computer microphone. If you have joined us by telephone, it's very, very important that you enter that PIN number that is given when you enter the webinar through your telephone. If you don't and you raise your hand and want to talk to us today, we would not be able to unmute you. So if you have entered by telephone, make sure that you've entered that little, it's either a 2 or a 3 number plus a pound, a PIN number that they give you. We will be using the chat box today to kind of monitor any questions or comments that you may have. And so to check out if it's working this morning, I'd like everybody to enter how many of these sessions have you attended so far. So if you could go ahead and enter the number of sessions, and I'm going to let Michelle will kind of read these out. So we have Rebecca that's done 4. We have a 3. My first one, welcome. Gabriella's had 2. We're starting out kind of small this morning, but I'm sure that people will be joining us as we go along. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. We will be monitoring that. I know at one point of the webinar, Michelle will be asking for a volunteer to participate in a coaching session. So if you can raise your hand if you want to be one of those volunteers, and she will explain all of that to you as we go along. I have muted everybody, so you don't need to worry that we're hearing any of your outside noise with where you are right now. Everything is fine. We will unmute you as needed. So our session today is Are We There Yet? Conversations to Help Navigate Parenting, and this is session 5. Let me tell you a little bit about Michelle Gordon-Johnson. Michelle has taught early childhood education and family study courses at the college level for more than 22 years. Prior to teaching the adult learner, Michelle was an infant, toddler, and preschool teacher. Additionally, she has experience in parent education, certified in a variety of parenting programs. For over a decade, Michelle has facilitated parenting groups and provided individual parent coaching, more recently using the parenting journal coaching tool that she authored called Are We There Yet? Conversations to Help Navigate Parenting. So at this time, I'm going to turn this over to Michelle and make her our presenter today. And I will have her take it from here.
Thanks, Carrie. Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate all the participants joining the webinar on a Friday morning. So I look forward to working with you, and I hope we'll have some volunteers that can weigh in and make us a much richer experience. But I'd like to get started by recapping some of the key concepts that we have learned on previous webinars. If this is your first, not to worry, we're going to go over those key concepts. And if you've been on a couple of these, I hope that I'll present in a way that will expand and enrich your learning. So we know, or at least I've come to discover, that parenting information by itself does not bring about positive, sustainable change. I was that parent. I have two boys now. They're 19 and 22. And I was that parent with young children with a stack of parenting books by my bedside. I had, and I certainly made the attempt, they were excellent books, and I made the attempt to read them, often falling asleep in the middle. But, I think I had this wish or this hope that just by reading them, I would be changed as a parent. So I'd go to sleep reading The Common Patient Parent, and voila, the next morning I'd wake up being just that. But as we know that learning in and of itself doesn't transform our behavior, that we need a vehicle, some way to move from learning a parenting concept to actually being able to apply that parenting concept. So that's what I've given a lot of thought to over my 10 plus years of parent coaching and working with parents, is what kind of framework, what would that framework look like that would support change? And the place that I've arrived is this, that if I can work with parents to first have them learn a concept, so whether that's about temperament or the difference between discipline and punishment or the developmental stages, if they can first learn about a concept, then the application becomes a journaling and coaching process. And I have 3 steps in that coaching process that I will, that support change that I'm going to demonstrate with the conversations today. So the first thing I want to do is to really amplify what's good and working already in the family. As we know, the family strengthening principles are to recognize the family's strength. First and foremost, we go on to work with their challenges and support them in the resources or coping strategies that they need. But they need to feel recognized in terms of what they're doing right to be motivated to work toward change. So you're going to see with these conversations that we're talking about today that I'm always going to start with a strength question. From the strength question, I will then reframe the challenges. I will ask in a way that hopefully hones in on what they want, what their values are, what's important for their family. I hope that my coaching work is cross-cultural. It's not based on what I want for the families, but what the family wants. What I think is appropriate or valued, but what feels appropriate and valued for the parent. That said, I am a parent educator, and so say, for example, we're talking about sleeping practices, I am going to align myself with the American Academy of Pediatrics' position on safe sleep. Or when we're talking about feeding practices and the introduction of food, I'm certainly going to use my knowledge to introduce that information. But when we're talking about characteristics they want to support with their children or how they want to spend family time, that really needs to come from the parent and their beliefs and values. And then lastly, I want to identify and support small changes. And again, those changes need to be identified by the parent. So I'm not advising them or suggesting changes or saying this is what's worked for me as a parent. I am helping to guide them, to lead them to their own answers around what change makes sense for them. And then based on what they've identified and what they value, I'm going to support that change, and I'm going to hold them accountable in a warm, cozy way to implementing those changes with the understanding that if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so they seek parent coaching because they're frustrated, their child is misbehaving and they don't know how to handle it. They're scared, they're worried, they're overwhelmed, and the only way to address that in sort of a significant way that matters is to support small changes. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take a look at, we have had 6 conversations over the course of these webinars, and I want to revisit them for those of you who haven't been on the line for those 6 conversations. I'm going to catch you up to speed. For those of you who have been, I'm hoping to give you some unique examples or some ways of thinking about it that will expand what you currently know about parent coaching. So there are a total of 10 conversations that I've identified that seem to be the conversations we have over and over with parents. And in terms of parent education, some sort of key concepts that they need to know. So in webinar 2, which is available in the Strategies Library, we had a conversation about packing. So essentially, we talked about how to understand how our childhood shows up in our parenting. And so taking that coaching model, amplify, reframe challenges, support change, I want to ask them an amplifying question around their strengths, something like, what is something from your childhood that felt good? A parent behavior, a feeling, a belief that's present in your parenting. So starting with that, they might talk about how even when they were mad, their parents always said good night. Then I can ask about how that felt for them. It probably felt really safe to go to sleep knowing that your parents still loved you even though there was anger in the home. And then I can even ask them how that presents in their current parenting. Is that something they're practicing? I want to reframe their challenges. So I might ask something like, what parent behavior or feeling or belief from childhood present in your parenting now do you no longer want to carry with you? And so that same parent might identify spanking. Great place to start. So it's not as if in our conversation about how they parented, they mentioned that they spanked, and I, after a gasp, said, oh my goodness, have you read the research on spanking? That's hardly the way to parent in 2018. Right away, wall up, resistance, they're being told what to do, and they're not eager for change. So they identified spanking as something they no longer wanted to carry. And so then we can identify a small change they can make related to spanking. So maybe the first small change is that they talk to their partner about how he or she feels about spanking. Is that something that the partner was raised with? And do they want to have spanking in their parenting suitcase? Maybe a small change is we're going to talk about a different strategy that would be effective when this misbehavior that they've been addressing with spanking occurs. So either of those, those are first steps that are really concrete and the parent will get on board with because it's been identified by the parent. Also in webinar 2, in the Strategies Library, we had the conversation mapping our route. And so mapping our route is about encouraging positive qualities in our children. And so we start that conversation by having them identify valued qualities that they want their children to develop. So perhaps they want their children to manage intense emotions, or they want their children, in addition, they want their children to have good manners. Again, these are coming from their values, which are markedly different between parents based on their upbringing, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status. All of these sociocultural contexts will determine what qualities they want their children to develop. And so my question in terms of amplifying strengths is, how do you, as the parent, live a quality you identified for your children? And so they have opportunity to say, it's really important in my family that my kids say please and thank you. And I say please and thank you too. When they hear me ordering food at a counter, they hear please and thank you. When I ask them to do something, they hear please and thank you. That's an opportunity for us to say, that's really great. You're modeling for them great manners. And now I want to reframe challenges. Where do you see a mismatch between a quality you want and what you do, your parenting? So they identified managing intense emotions as a quality, and now they're saying, I want that for my children, and yet when I get angry, I sure yell a lot. And so, great, again, it's not coming from an outside person saying, yelling as a parent is really damaging. We know it is, but no one responds well when they're told. They're saying, I want to learn how to handle my anger. And so we can ask then, what is one change you can make so that your parenting behavior, how you handle your emotions, matches the quality you want? And so they might say, I want to learn a self-calming strategy. Fantastic. I can help you with that. I have some self-calming strategies. We can practice some self-calming strategies. And that can be the discussion about a change they want to implement. Okay, so that was webinar 2. We went on with webinar 3 with 2 additional conversations available in the strategies library. And conversation 3 was fuel for the road. So with this conversation, we're talking about how can the parent bring self-care back into their life. Very often, as many of you, I imagine, have discovered that, in terms of priorities, that gets pushed down and pushed down and pushed down, and we need to pull it back up. So we need to see changes within the parent to see changes with the child. And so we can start with an amplification of strengths question. We can ask, what are some things that you're grateful for? Great place to start. And so the parent might say, I love how my dog greets me when I come home from work every day. He's so excited, which is a really nice feel-good place to start, and acknowledging that self-care, having someone excited, having your dog excited about you. Anything that fuels you is self-care. We might then reframe their challenge of being really depleted in their self-care and ask them, what is something you could do to move the gas gauge closer to full? What's something specific you can do? And perhaps they identify, I'm helping in the classroom 4 hours a week, and that's really feeling like a lot. And then we, acknowledge and appreciate it's great you're helping in your child's classroom. That can make a big difference in their learning, and they know that you value education. And I bet they're proud to have you in their classroom. That's fantastic. What feels like, and now we're moving toward that small change, what feels like a more reasonable amount? I think 2 hours would be, then I'd have 2 hours before I picked him up, and I could take a walk down by the lake. Fantastic. What's that first step you need to do to make that change? Well, I'm going to send an email to the teacher. I'm going to let her know that I really need to switch to a 2-hour shift. Fantastic. Can I check back with you next time we meet and see how that worked out? Yeah, I'd love that. Please check back with me, because I feel a little guilty doing that, and I feel badly, but I know I should do it because it will be much better. So yeah, please check back. Please check back with me. Okay. So then we went to conversation 4, road trip bingo. And this is looking at how to create a better fit between our child's temperament and our own temperament. So we want to start with an amplification question. Where is there a good fit between your temperament and your child's temperament? The parent identifies that both have a high activity level. Wow, that's fantastic. Often parents feel like they have a lower activity level than their child, and they're falling asleep and their child's jumping on their head. It's great that you can be active together. Then we want to talk a little bit about the challenges the parent is experiencing. So as you saw on the journaling pages, there was a bingo board with difficult temperament traits that parents could circle. So an opportunity to reframe challenges might be something like, think about those temperament traits you circled. Why are they difficult for your child, do you think? Wow, that's a whole empathy question. Looking at those traits rather than, it makes me crazy when my child, looking at it like, I wonder what it's like to be a child who has a really hard time transitioning. It must feel overwhelming. It must feel scary to walk into a room full of people and have to transition into that. Or it must be frustrating. I'm right in the middle of building a huge block tower, and Mom comes to school to pick me up and says, let's go. And we can support that parent by really appreciating how they're able to see those qualities, those difficult qualities from their child's perspective, and have a lot of empathy around that. And so we're ready to ask, how can you change your behavior, your expectations, the situation, so there's a better fit with this difficult trait? And perhaps the parents then are ready to recognize that they need to show up at events earlier and let kids come after, so it's not so overwhelming to walk in. Maybe getting a little bit earlier to school when kids, it's just beginning. Kids are still arriving, not walking into a room full of kids. Or maybe giving transitional warnings when we pick up our child at school. Hey, honey, I want to let you know we're going to be leaving in 10 minutes, so you might want to finish up what you're doing. Okay, we're leaving in 5 minutes. So that it doesn't feel so abrupt for your slow to warm child. Our last conversation, I know this is a lot of information, so I'm going to pause for questions at the end, but I did want to catch everyone up to speed and really have you understand moving through this coaching process of amplify strengths, reframe challenges, and support change. So that last conversation webinar 4 we had is a conversation 5, middle of the road. And we're helping parents to find a balanced parenting approach. So using Diana Baumrin's parenting styles, we're going to say, okay, what's a middle of the road approach? And so we want to acknowledge with that amplification, clear and firm parenting expectations they have, but still flexible when it needs to be. Maybe something like curfew. It curfews this time, but if there's a dance or a special occasion, we can be flexible. Let's talk about what time makes sense in that situation. We can also reframe challenges and ask them about a parenting expectation that they have that might be rigid or inconsistent or absent. And at this time, parents often identify chores, which is a fantastic opportunity to talk about how important chores are and what they offer children. That responsibility that comes from them, sense of community, commitment, participating in something sort of larger than themselves, giving to the group. And so that change might be the parent saying, yay, I've been meaning to put up a chore chart. This is a good opportunity. Can we work on that together? Can we create a chore chart? Fantastic change. And the last conversation that we're going to recap is conversation 6, knock it off in the back seat. And this is when we turn discipline strategies into learning opportunities. There are 2 conversations that are more parent education than the others. And this is one of them. There are about a half a dozen discipline strategies in that reading that parents can learn, practice, implement in their own homes that they can find really helpful. So you'll want to sort of pull out that education component and emphasize that. But again, we're going to amplify strengths. What's something you appreciate about your child? Perhaps they'll say he's kind to his little brother. Wow, that's a really great quality. I remember when you were identifying valued qualities you wanted your child to develop, kindness was one of them. Must feel really good to see that in your son. And then from there you can move to the challenge of what child behavior concerns you. Oh, you know, he's a great kid. He's really kind to his little brother, but he procrastinates and he doesn't get his homework done and he's always doing it at the last minute. What life skill is your child not demonstrating with this behavior? Well, probably time management. He doesn't have a really healthy habit around homework. Great. So we've set the parent up now to be ready and receptive for a change. So to help your child gain those healthy habits and time management skills, what is a learning opportunity from that reading that you could apply? They might say, you know, I could set a better limit. I need to say that homework is done before, you know, screen time, or, you know, outside to play basketball, or I could set a clear, consistent limit around that. Fantastic. So that's moving through 6 sessions. So I want you to imagine that at the end of these 6 sessions, you have 6 concrete changes that have come from the parent based on their values and beliefs and what's important to them and their priorities that you can support, revisit, and hold them accountable to sort of making that change that they identified. So I'd love to pause there, and that's a whole lot of information. Hopefully it's recapping too, but I would like to pause there and ask if there are any questions. I'm going to take a look at the text box, take a sip of tea while I'm looking at the text box, and pause. So the suggestion to raise your hand or post them in the chat box is great. Both work. And also we can unmute you, and if you want to process some of that information with a couple of questions, happy to do that. This won't be the last chance to ask questions, so know that if something pops up for you, just jot it down, and there'll be more opportunities. Okay, so let's get started on some new information. So I summarized the last 6 conversations. This 7th conversation we're going to spend some more time on. We're going to slow down a little bit and really absorb this new material. Okay, so conversation 7 is points of interest along the way. So this was in the attachments that were sent to you, and I'm hoping that you had an opportunity, if not to thoroughly read them, to at least glance through and know what you're going to return to when the webinar is over. So those are available to you, and we have 2 of those, conversation 7 and conversation 8. Okay, so this is the reading portion or the teaching portion of the conversation, and I designed all of the readings to take about 5 minutes. I figure that's about how much time we have in bed at night as an exhausted parent before we fall asleep with the book on our chest. So here we go. So this is looking at developmental stages and needs of children. And so I imagine many of you have a background in ECE, child development, human development, and so I imagine you immediately recognize these stages as Erikson's stage. Erikson's stages. So here we go. The first stage is trust. So with our baby, we need to sensitively respond to their need for food, and their need to have their wet diaper changed, as well as their need to be soothed, or their need for smiles and for someone to talk with them, and their need for interaction, and their need to feel safe. And when we sensitively and appropriately respond to them, when we're attuned to their needs, they feel safe and they feel secure. So that's all that attachment research that I imagine that you're familiar with. So we're really emphasizing that growing attachment during the first year. So in the reading, there is not only a description of the stage, but there's a list of developmental needs for each stage, and that's what we focus on with the parent. The next stage is autonomy. So thinking about our toddlers and our twos. And so we want to provide opportunities to gain self-sufficiency. And so a developmental need might be that the child needs us to share power with them so they have choices when it's appropriate. Not too much power, they need limits, but power to decide if they want to wear the red sweater or the blue sweater, or when we cross the street, maybe they hold our hand or we hold their hand. These kinds of choices that are appropriate for their age. Again, to be very cognizant of cultural differences. Not all cultural groups see autonomy as the developmental need during toddlers and twos. And so it may be a conversation about how to support our child growing to be bicultural. So in a mainstream school, they will need self-sufficiency. That will be the expectation of a school, that they feed themselves and do their own toileting and take care of their nap items. And perhaps at home, there are different expectations, and that's fine. Children can navigate different cultural expectations in two environments, and we can help them to be adept at being bicultural. The next stage is initiative, so we're talking about the preschool years, and children want to be more self-directed during this time. Their play is growing in terms of imagination, and they're picking roles. I'll be the firefighter, or I'll be the pirate, or I'll be the mommy or the daddy, you be the kitty. And they are playing out these rich scenarios in a very child-directed way, and they need time to do that. So child-directed activities are essential for healthy development during the preschool years, actually at any stage. We then grow up a little bit and we enter the school years. I think of industry in terms of being industrious, and how that feels to be industrious. And so during the school years, their confidence is growing, their sense of competence and capabilities. So they're gaining confidence and competence and capabilities in those tasks that society values. Again, culturally, depending on their cultural group. So accomplishing their times tables and how to spell and writing skills and how to play baseball or how to swim or how to play chess, hopscotch. All of these skills take the child being industrious and really sort of jumping in, a leap of faith that they're confident and competent enough to accomplish that task. And then we end with, not in terms of Erikson's stages, but the ones that are shared in the journal, and this is the teen years, and we're going to build a tolerance for the larger stressors of adulthood. This could be a conversation about helicopter parenting, if that's your parent population, if they tend to hover and rescue and take over for their child. But it might also be a conversation when we have a child who's rebelling. What might that mean in terms of identity development? So that's the education piece. Focus on the age and stage of the child they're parenting. That is a whole lot of information for a parent with a 2-year-old. They can get an overview of the developmental stages by reading, but then in the conversation we want to really look at where their child is. So we can see, I'm going to go through these stages and then I'm going to ask for a volunteer who might join me, and I'm hoping, because it's an awful lot of me talking this morning, but I'd love to hear from you in the text box what your child's current developmental stage is. So if you can type that in, that would be great. Using those stages of trust and autonomy and initiative and industry and identity. Where is your child currently? School age. So we have industry. Right. Where else are children? If you're parenting a child. Is anyone parenting a baby and experiencing the, toddler. So you're in the stage of autonomy. We'll talk about that. Anyone else parenting, have a child in the home? What age is that child? An adult. 3 years old. 3 years old, so initiative. Absolutely. 6 months old, so initiative, and 4 years old. So 6 months would be trust, and then the 4-year-old would be initiative. And adults, I have 2 boys, as I said, 19 and 22, and they are moving into intimacy versus isolation, according to Erickson. So figuring out how to navigate an intimate relationship. A 7-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. So 2 industrious children, 2 in the stage of industry. Okay, so that would be the process that we would initiate with the parent. And so we want to ask them, what is your child's current developmental stage? And what is a developmental need that you consistently support? And so in doing this, we would reference the reading that you did in that handout. And so the parent might identify that they have a 2-year-old. You'd say, so that would be the stage of autonomy, and we might even give a description around that. So I imagine sometimes at home you hear do it myself, that they want to do things on their own. They're just getting a sense of possession, so they, it's mine. We hear a lot often with the 2-year-old. So helping them to learn about their child's developmental stage. One thing that the research tells us is that parents have very, I don't want to say inappropriate, I want to say sort of elevated expectations of what their child is capable. There was a parent poll not long ago from the group 0 to 3, and things like parents expecting a 2-year-old to be able to share. They would expect a 3-year-old to be able to control their strong emotions. So they expected a lot of children who'd just been in the world for 2 or 3 years, not understanding the developmental progression of events. And so when we look at the research on child abuse and neglect, what we see is it is often inappropriate expectations, thinking my child at 2 should be able to do this, get ready on their own, or take care of their needs on their own, or share with their sibling. It sets us up for abuse and neglect. So this piece in terms of parent education is really important. If we look at the protective factors that have been identified in the strengthening field, we can see that knowledge of child development is tops the list. because it is so essential that parents understand what children are capable of and what their challenges are at the various ages and stages. So let's talk about that 2-year-old in autonomy who's saying, do it myself. And so as a parent, I might report in terms of a developmental need that I consistently support. Perhaps I let them feed themselves, and I let them try to buckle their own car seat, though I always check it. And I have some elastic waist pants for them so they can put their pants on by themselves. So I'm really trying to support their self-help skills by having those ways of parenting available. So that's what we amplify what's good and working. Now with the same parent, we want to move to reframing challenges. So we're going to ask them, what is the developmental need that you want to work on? And so perhaps that developmental need, when they look through that list, is establishing predictable routines, that they feel like nighttime, especially bedtime, is all over the map, that they don't have anything consistent. Again, cultural sensitivity, that might not be a cultural value, but if they identify that as a developmental need that they want to support, then you can work on what that would look like in terms of a change. So they've identified their goal, and they've identified what they want to change. And so then we can help them to perhaps create a bedtime routine chart to follow. Okay. So what I would like to do is to have someone join me on the line and talk about their own child. I saw about a half a dozen parents in the audience, and I'm hoping we can go through this process starting back at the first stage and talk about that from a different perspective and hear a different voice. So would love to have a hand right now to get that happening. Is there anyone who would be willing to volunteer? Saw a couple of parents of toddlers and 3- and 4-year-olds. I teach child development at Cal Poly, the local university, and I always have child development majors, but one quarter I had an engineering student. And I noticed that Ben didn't say anything for a couple of weeks. So I said, Ben, you're the only male in the class. I said this to him privately. I would love to hear you, share your ideas and talk about, from your perspective. You're an engineering major. We're all child development. And I don't know anything about child development. I don't want to get it wrong. I said, Ben, this is child development. You can't get it wrong. We'll find something in what you say to affirm and strengthen and amplify. I promise you, Ben, it's always safe to talk in a child development class. So the same goes for a child development webinar, always safe. Facilitators trained in early childhood and child development will always find a strength to amplify and a way to validate what that person is saying. And I hope that's true in your parent coaching as well, that you'll find ways to really strengthen and validate the conversation.
Michelle, they're being shy this morning.
Okay.
You all can tell Michelle is a very kind person, so I think it's very nice to you.
Shane or Carrie, can you think back when you had young children, and will you sort of use that as a context and work through the steps? I would love to model that. Do we have a organizer that would be willing to go through it? And we'll revisit. Even we can do adolescence if you have anyone in the identity stage.
Yes. Hi, Michelle. This is Carrie. So yes, I have raised 4 children that are all adults now. But my 16-year-old grandson does live with us, and I'm also enjoying 2 baby grandsons, one that's 10 months and one that's 15 months. So
Oh my
I would be
goodness.
more than happy to go through this with you. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. And can we talk about your 16-year-old?
Sure, let's talk about him.
In a kind way. It's okay. He could be listening and he'd be fine with it.
Yes.
He's in this stage of identity, and looking at those developmental needs, and let's take a look in terms of the adolescent years. And so, during those years, you really need to do a lot of listening, as you probably know. We always need to sort of hold off on giving advice or telling them what we think, and we just need to listen for a while and help them discover often their own answers, which seems like a lot like coaching. But they also really need us present during that age. That, it's interesting because it's almost they become so independent, we think, okay, well, I guess I'm going to, go rediscover my own life, only to find in some ways they need us more than ever during their adolescent years. And they need us to value who they are and not who we think they should be. And they also really need us present to still provide firm, clear limits so that they're safe, and parental monitoring is still really appropriate during the adolescent years. And so let's start with asking you, based on that, what's a developmental need that you feel like you consistently support with your grandson that's living at home?
I think he still is very much in the stage of trying to figure out, his style, his personality, his choice of friends, his choice of extracurricular activities. So I think we try to support him in this journey of his own discovery.
Nice. And can you think of that's fantastic. I'm just wondering, as an example, can you think of a way that a specific example around that?
Well, he has a very quirky sense of style, and so we definitely try to, if he's needing a certain article of clothing, I only want to wear, black skinny jeans now, or his hair color. He changes his hair on a regular basis, in the bright hair dye. I've learned from raising 4 children that hair dye is the very least of my worries, so we try to, support that. I'd like to go neon blue now. All right. Let's do neon blue.
Right. It's great that you have that awareness and that perspective that you can always change your hair dye, and this is part of the process for him of self-expression and figuring out who he is. Nice. And how does he respond to that in terms of, how do you think that makes him feel to have you accept his personal expression choices around, his own body?
I think he feels really supported in that, and he's actually expressed, even an easiness in being able to ask for these different things. Certainly his mother, because he has a young mother, but even more so that his grandmother and grandfather are cool enough to support him in these fun decisions that he's making in his style, his look.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic, and it's nice that you can feel his response to that as well. It's often difficult with teens to know, is this working, is this, but that's great. So I do want to ask you, what's a developmental need that you want to work on when you're looking through, hopefully you're either looking at the journal or you have the handout in front of you, if not just thinking about some of the challenges for parents with children that age is to be able to listen without interjecting advice. That certainly was a challenge for me. Or I always wanted to save my teenagers from disappointment, and I really fell easily into rescuing. What are you finding is a developmental need you want to pay more attention to?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. You know, as we see the struggles, you know, like he would love to have a girlfriend. You know, a lot of his friends have girlfriends now, and you know, so he's even shared a little bit. And it's like, you know, you almost want to give too much advice, too much counsel, wisdom, and it really is just kind of sitting back and letting him just kind of talk about it, and then just providing, you know, that empathy and support rather than, you know, well, this is what you need to do, you know. So it is kind of sitting back and realizing that this is part of the journey that he has to go through with the heartaches and everything that go along with being an adolescent, you know. And you're right, it is, I do sometimes want to fix everything and make everything better, and you can't.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that you would like to listen more with maybe some empathy statements and maybe some paraphrasing and hold off on giving advice. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Okay. Yeah. So in sort of doing, you know, what you described, what would be the first step? So the changes that you want to listen more with empathy and maybe paraphrasing, what's the first step? What would support you in doing that? Giving less advice. What would support you in doing that? I
think the first thing that I probably need to do is to really focus. I tend to get distracted, or if maybe he's wanting to talk when I'm doing something else. So I think the first thing I need to do is realize how extraordinary it is to have an adolescent want to talk to you. And so to really put everything down at that moment and really focus on what he is saying and really listen.
That's a great first step, and what tremendous insight on your part that it starts with the putting everything down and listening. That you can't provide the paraphrasing or the empathetic statements. You know, the advice is sort of when we're half listening, we throw out the advice. And so I love that. So you're going to, it sounds like when he approaches you to talk, you're going to have greater awareness of sort of pause, listen. Yes. Okay, great. So would it be okay if I check back with you about this next week when we meet, that I ask how that worked out and if you were able to sort of pause more when he begins to talk with you and sort of focus more on that and let some other things go, whatever you may be doing at the moment? Does that sound okay to check back with you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing.
Okay. Now see how easy that was, everybody?
Nicely modeled. Nicely modeled. Thank you. It worked out well. I want to pause here and see if there's any questions about that process. And hopefully folks feel like they can, they have enough information to implement that and to be active in doing that coaching process. Okay, and then our next conversation 8, is sharing the driving. And so this conversation is about how to work with our parent partner more effectively. And I try in the reading in the journal, and that's in the handout that you have, to open up that idea of parenting partner in a really broad way. So I recognize that a third of our families are headed by a single parent. The parenting partner might be a boyfriend, girlfriend, might just be a housemate with no intimate relationship, might be a parent, a grandparent who lives in the home, or a grandparent who lives out of the home. It might be a same-sex partner, might be grandparents raising children. So I want to keep that idea of who's in our family and who is our parent partner for the parent to identify, not for me to identify for them. So key concepts in the reading include that our parenting beliefs are formed over our lifetime. So back to that whole idea of packing our suitcase that we started out with. And so what we have in that parenting suitcase is both helpful, but can also be not so helpful in that we can get stuck in thinking that there's one right way to parent. And then we bring this parenting suitcase, these firmly held beliefs, with us to our co-parenting relationship. And human nature is that we try to get other people to believe exactly what we believe, so that we can feel good about what we believe, right? Isn't that why we do it? And then what we want to help parents to see, sort of guide them in, is that the beliefs we've carried from childhood, to recognize those beliefs, but also recognize that our parenting partner has their own set of strengths and competencies, and if we step back, we might be able to appreciate their role. If during this conversation it comes up that they don't have competencies and they don't have strengths, and the parent doesn't feel safe about the way their co-parent parents with that child, that's a very different conversation. That is a conversation perhaps about safety. That might be a conversation for a referral to a marriage therapist. So we talked about in the very first webinar that we're not therapists, and we should stay very clear in our parent coaching role, that we don't step into the role of therapist. And it may be that we suggest to the parent, it sounds like speaking with a therapist or a professional in that, it might be helpful. Is that something you would consider? And so again, at this stage, if there are safety issues about the co-parent or deeper issues, that is for someone, the recommendation perhaps that they seek therapy or counseling around the relationship. It's not a parenting conversation anymore. It's a relationship conversation. So we're keeping this as a parenting conversation, very different. And I think you'll see that as we move along. So let's go through what those 3 layers would be. So the first is to ask the parent, what is a parenting belief that you and your partner share? So for example, it may be that both you and your partner believe in the importance of community service. So you have been volunteering through your church once a month with families in need, and you both really think that's so important, not just for your own well-being and fulfillment, but you think that's an important quality for your children to develop as well. So we can really acknowledge that that's working great. It's great that you and your partner are both on board with that, and you both feel like that is of value, and I can see why it would develop some really great characteristics in your children, to, kindness, to help others, altruism. So we can spend some time really acknowledging what they're doing that's working well. We want then to talk about the challenges in a confined to parenting. So again, other relationship challenges, they need to address that with a relationship expert or professional or therapist. So we're going to stay in the coaching hat. So now we can reframe challenges, think about a parenting belief that you have that's in conflict with your partner's belief. So what is your belief? And what is your partner's belief? Their partner may be grandma who doesn't live in the same house, and maybe grandma is telling them that they need to be feeding the child or disciplining the child in a particular way. So, that might move in a different direction. That will move in a different direction than if they have a parenting, an intimate partner in the home. I worked with a couple who had later school-age child or school-age children, junior high-age children, and they had very different beliefs around screen use, where the husband thought the children didn't really need screen limits. He felt like they got their homework done, They were doing sports. They were involved in extracurricular activities. Mom had done a lot of research on the problems with screen use, and she was fast forwarding in her mind to all these really sort of damaging outcomes. And so she had been trying to implement very strict guidelines around screen use. So the parents had tremendous conflict over this, and I think the conflict was much more damaging than the potential for the screens, because this was very clear to the children that the parents really disagreed on this topic. And so what we explored is sort of what was the mom's belief, what was the dad's belief around screens. We focused on two primary areas, when the screen should be shut down at night and if there should be screens available at dinner. And then the last part of this process was, how could they merge the two beliefs by compromising or finding a new way that worked for both of them. So she wanted everything off at 8 and no screen time at dinner. He was comfortable closer to 9-ish, and he was using his own phone at dinner. He was willing to compromise with 8:30 and no screens for the 45 minutes of dinner. As this went on, it became clear that this was much more of a relationship issue than it was a parenting issue. She was so resentful and had been, she felt like she was parenting solo for so long, and he felt like she was making everything a battle, that really we froze our coaching sessions there while they explored the possibility of marriage counseling. So that's how it played out. So sometimes I had hoped that they would be able to find a middle of the road, a way to share the driving, but in this situation they weren't able to do that, which sometimes happens, that the coaching at that time wasn't the best fit for them. Okay. So any one who wants to give this a go with their parenting partner. It could even be if you have disagreement over the rearing of your cat or dog. If you have disagreement over the rearing of a pet or something else, as long as it's related to parenting, or disagreement over a child, anyone willing to raise their hand. Otherwise, I will ask our presenter, Carrie, or our organizer, Terry or Shane, if they want to jump in again. Carrie or Shane? I'm not hearing anyone.
Well, this is Shane. It's so simple at the moment, Michelle. I am married, but we don't even have pets, so I'm not sure.
Not even a goldfish to disagree about?
Not even a goldfish. I mean, we have disagreements, of course, but
right.
Any pets right. I did put a little note in the box, just that I don't know if this is relevant, but I don't have children, but I have a sister who got divorced last year, and she has an almost 9-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old daughter. And I think she and her ex-husband are doing a really good job parenting together, even though they're not living together anymore. They are very, they're very open to the girls needing to call their mom or dad when they have time, with either one of them. So they're often on the iPad together, or calling mom from dad's house, kind of thing. And then they still schedule family time. They still go to movies together. They still have dinner. They still do things, not all the time, but probably several times a month. They'll have an evening together, or a Sunday afternoon together, where they, just the four of them. So they kind of maintain that family feeling for the girls, which I think is, again, I'm not a parent, but I think that's really important for the girls to feel that unity.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think, and it, in terms of thinking about the parenting beliefs that your sister and her ex-husband share, and sort of the two parents share, is a belief that although they are not living together, they are still co-parenting, and it sounds like they really both value what it means to be a family and what it means to model positive, healthy communication. So many shared beliefs, and I think it is, it's a great example because it is those shared beliefs that probably allow them to do this, because those beliefs sort of supersede any possible anger or whatever happened to dissolve the relationship. They still truly believe in their family, and they still really believe in healthy, positive communication is essential for their children's healthy development. So I love that. That's such a great illustration of parenting beliefs that really unite people, because so often, and I imagine this may have been true when they were together, mismatched parenting beliefs, or when their parenting beliefs are in conflict, it can be one of the biggest stressors in a parenting relationship, and it really can lead to long-term damage in the relationship, because one parent doesn't feel respected or heard, or they're constantly in conflict about how to parent, which is as damaging as not parenting well, which is so ironic. So thank you, Shane. I really appreciate that.
I think part of it too is that my sister was a stay-home mom with her kids until about a year ago or a year and a half ago. So she was with them every day of their lives, and so that was a pretty big adjustment for her too, that she wasn't with them all the time. So even on weekends when he had them, she still would figure out a way to go visit, or to see them physically, because she was, because they're so important to her, and they were still little. So yeah, so I think they've done a pretty good job of parenting through the divorce.
Right, absolutely, and definitely the research shows, in terms of parents divorcing and the impact on the children, and something I really stress with parents that I coach is that typically prior to a divorce there are high levels of conflict in the home. That's most often the case. Mm-hmm. What children need to experience is a reduction in conflict. When the conflict continues at high levels, but now the children don't have both parents in the home, and they may be now sharing a room instead of having their own room. They may have moved from their friends, started a new school, so they have all these changes, and the conflict hasn't changed. For parents, divorce is often the beginning of their solution. For children, it can be the beginning of their problems. How do we make that better? We co-parent in a way that reduces conflict. So children are actually better off. So fantastic. Whole conversation. That's a whole nother webinar. I love it. Okay. Thanks again. So let's open it up. So those were the 3 levels of that conversation, and I took you through with an example, and then Shane had some really good information. And so there we are at the end of conversation 8, and I want to, at this time, to invite you to ask any questions. You can do that via the chat box. We could unmute you. But any questions related to content? We have session 6, our last webinar related to the series. We're going to wrap it up with 2 final conversations on April 20th, same time. But now's a really good time. 2 questions. Great. I just saw that pop up.
So Amanda, let me unmute you so you can ask that question those 2 questions out loud. Amanda, are you there?
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Just 2 questions for you. One, I just wanted to see if there's any type of certificate or any type of confirmation that those that have been following the webinar would be receiving just as proof of training or what have you?
Good question. And fortunately, we talked about this before the webinar. So I would like to absolutely acknowledge those who participate in all 6. So what I encourage those individuals to do is, I'm just checking, there it is. So there's, you can contact me through navigateparenting.com,
Okay.
or you can text me, and I'll send you, probably easiest, just text me, 805-441-7438, when the conversation's over. Text me in and say I'm interested in a certificate, send your email. So after session 6, what I'll do is I'll have your name after session 6, because you'll contact me through email or texting. And I will verify your participation in all of the webinars with our organizer. And once that's been verified, I will send you a certificate. Does that meet your needs, and is that sort of what you imagined?
Yeah, that's great. It's just something to, give proof to my agency that I'm doing extra, education.
Perfect. And just to clarify, the certification will come from Navigate Parenting. So I will find that it won't be from Strategies. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that still works.
Okay.
And then my second question, really quick, was going to be that
we're not in any hurry.
Okay.
What was that?
I work with a lot of Spanish-speaking families, and I was wondering if your book had been translated into Spanish.
It hasn't. So a little bit about the journal. So I wrote that first edition that just got published last March. Mm-hmm. And then I did these webinars. And if any of you have purchased the journal, you can see the questions are different. And the questions that I went over today are working really well for the coaching process. So my plan is in the next month or 2 to edit it, not the text, but just the journaling questions, have it available by summer on Amazon with the journal questions edited to match what I shared with you today. And then I went through those 6 conversations, and then I do conversations 7 and 8. And I would love to have it translated. Certainly, I live in SLO County. I know it would be well received in Spanish in SLO County. And you've given me the idea perhaps to look for someone who could do that in the future. But I think cool. Yeah. And I think, always when you translate, there is also it really would need to be someone who is very familiar with, sort of, so that it would be culturally appropriate as well, that it wouldn't just be a translation in terms of language. So I'd really have to be sensitive to that as well, and that's a whole other layer. So, but thanks for asking. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, for answering this question.
Okay, not a problem. Anyone else? I'd love to hear about the work you do, and if you have any questions in terms of how to do the coaching in your current work, whether you're a family advocate or a preschool teacher, maybe a home visiting nurse or a parent educator. So many questions around how to use it in that.
Do you use your materials in your classes, Michelle? Do you use these in your EC classes that you teach?
Do I use what?
Do you use your book and the materials that you've presented here? Do you use that in your classes as well?
I do. I teach a parenting class at Cuesta College, which is a community college, and we go through the journal. So not everyone in that class is a parent. It's not designed to teach parenting per se to parents. It's designed to help those who work with parents to better support families and to strengthen families. And so I use the journal. I actually use it in a very identical way that I have on this webinar. When we meet, we go through the conversations. We talk about how to support families through those through that change framework. So, yeah, I do.
I would think these materials would be really, any folks that are on the webinar who teach parenting classes, that maybe this would be a really nice companion piece to the curriculum that they use.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, I am certified in the active parenting curriculum, and sometimes I will sort of augment that, or use some of my coaching strategies within established curriculum, or I'm currently facilitating a parenting group, and I move through the journal with that group. We do one conversation a week, so they read the conversation on their own, and then as a group we talk about the experience and go through those journaling questions. Yeah.
Rosita's asking if you teach any online classes through Questa.
I do. I teach, actually, I'm just wrapping up. Parenting is online. Theory of Parenting is online. It is Human Development, Human Services 216. I think we've just changed the name to 217. So it's going to be an ECE and a Human Development class, and Theory of Parenting, and I teach that entirely online. And it should be offered next spring through Questa College. I'm just wrapping up now. Okay. So
she bought your book and she's sharing it with your agency, and that you're awesome.
Nice, nice. I'm also happy if anyone wants to contact me. I'm happy to come speak with agencies. I'm happy to. One of the challenges on a webinar is it's less interactive than I think is ideal, just the nature of the beast. And so I'm really happy to join in the agencies if you're interested, and have a conversation in person. So that's always an option. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate, for those of you who are new to the webinar, to the series, I certainly hope you'll join us for session 6 on April 20th. For those of you who have been here for the long haul, I so appreciate you tuning in. I think it's been once or twice a month for a couple of months. So thank you so much, and it's been such a pleasure working with everyone, and I look forward to talking with you again soon. Thanks. And
Thank you so much, Michelle. Once again, I wish I could have a do-over with my own children, but I do get an opportunity with grandchildren to put some of these great ideas into practice. It's just such a pleasure to be working with you through this series. I'd like to refer all of you to our website, strategyca.org, where we will have the library of the recordings. Please give me a few days to get this latest recording up. I will send everybody an email that will give you the link, the PowerPoint presentation, and I will also attach the 2 handouts that were a part of this particular session. So with that, we will see you all in a couple of weeks. Please don't be shy about volunteering next time to have your very own coaching session with Michelle. And everybody have a really great weekend.